Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. In the past, Rich Planet has covered the subject of UFOs and related subjects in dozens of shows. A new book by researcher Andrew Johnson looks into the UFO issue. His book attempts to give answers to such questions as: have aliens visited us? What do they look like? Where do they come from? Why are they here? What historical evidence exists to show that aliens have been involved in the evolution or the creation of humans? Is there an alien or UFO cover-up? If so, how is it kept in place? Andrew's book includes over 900 references and aims to give the reader a perspective on alien intervention, alien abduction, alien contact, landings and crashes. The involvement of military and intelligence interests and their influence on the so-called disclosure movement is also discussed. Welcome back, Andrew Johnson.
Thanks for inviting me back, Richard. It's good to be here again.
And as you may have noticed, I'm sporting the shitty blue fleece and Andrew's sporting the shitty black t-shirt.
Yes, well, I mean, the whole fleece thing has become like an alien life form. It's taken on a life of its own, and my particular fleece may very well have to be rehomed. I'm not sure at this point. And even this morning I received an email from somebody saying that they liked my choice in fleeces. So you know, it's and I was kind of I didn't know what to think of you calling it the Shitty Blue Fleece Tour. It was an interesting choice of title from my perspective. So yeah, it's definitely taken a life of its own. Yeah,
so these are very warm, and winter is coming, so you can buy them from the Rich Planet website, and also, as Andrew is sporting, the Rich Planet polo shirt.
Absolutely.
So you can get those and other products from Rich Planet's website.
I never expected that Richard would be starting a boutique, but maybe that's on the cards for the future. I don't know.
All right. Now, this is Andrew's new book, which is very interesting. And obviously, it's how many pages?
It's about 430 pages, I think, something like that.
We can't cover the entire content, but I've picked out some of the interesting parts. And as I was reading it, what came to my mind is that you've got all what you consider to be the best UFO information, and you've gone through it with an Occam's razor, or as I'm calling it, Johnson's razor, right? And you've included some evidence which you think is less solid, but you've said why that is, and the evidence which you think is far better for evidence of extraterrestrials on Earth. You've gone into it in a lot of detail.
Yes.
So there's information because I've got 2 whole shelves full of UFO books next door, right? So there's no way you can include that, although you do have 900 references in there. You've included what you believe to be the best evidence, and we're going to go through some of that today. And you've split the book into 2 sections, so you've separated out crop circles, which I think is possible. Maybe doesn't even belong in a UFO/alien book, possibly, right? But I don't know whether we will reach that section today. Yeah. But we did discuss that in a previous show. But you've added to that significantly in this book.
Yeah. Right.
A lot more information than we covered in the previous crop circle show. Yeah. All right. So let's start off then. So your interest in UFOs began when you were quite young. You had some sightings, and you also met the famous UFO researcher Tony Dodd when you were young.
Yes.
So tell us first about the meeting that you had with former police officer Tony Dodd.
Yes, well, that came about as a result of I had my first sighting when I was about 10 years old, so that wasn't connected to the Tony Dodd encounter particularly, really. But that was one of the things that sparked my interest, and I go into that in the first chapter of the book. What happened was I decided to do my A-level general studies project on UFOs, basically. And when I was discussing this with the teachers, I think it was my form tutor at the time, it was called Mr. Jones, and I actually met him in Skipton one time when I was on a return visit, probably about at least 20 years ago, maybe longer. And he actually lived across the road from Tony Dodd. And when my English teacher learned that I was doing this project, he said, "Oh, you should go and see this chap who lives across the road from me, because he's got the weirdest stories, you know." And I looked at his face when he was saying this, and I could tell that he didn't really. He knew that Tony was a serious-minded person, you know, and not to come out with these strange stories just as a fantasy, because as I soon found out that Tony Dodd was a police officer, and he was still a serving police officer when I met him, which was probably 1982 when I first met him. And he actually gave me some information about some of the cases he was investigating at that time.
Now, you've had 4 sightings yourself, which you go into in the book. And in the mid-2000s, you found out about the Disclosure Project, which we've discussed on the show before. This is covered in many shows. So this was it started off as documents put together by Dr. Stephen Greer of people in military and intelligence giving inside knowledge or inside information on the UFO phenomenon. And so I can recommend that people watch the 2-hour video that was produced by the Disclosure Project, or there's a 4-hour version, and there's also a briefing document. And the point that we were making is that neither of us knew about it when it happened, which is significant because it was at the Washington DC Press Club, and it was obviously those who were organising it and involved in it thought it was going to change the whole world. They thought huge things were going to come of it. There was going to be a massive worldwide UFO disclosure, and everyone was going to understand that UFOs were real, blah, blah, blah. But, a watershed moment. So you point to a BBC website where it's mentioned, and it's played down, really. Yeah,
I mean, what struck me and how I got into it all was especially that, as you mentioned, the BBC report, which I mentioned in the book. And, we had this event, there were military people, there was John Callaghan, who used to be the head of the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority. As I said at interviews at the time, we're not talking about somebody walking their dog down the street who sees a bright light in the sky. You had John Callaghan with the radar evidence from the Japan Airlines case from 1986. And yet the BBC article describes that as saying UFO spotters slam cover-up. These people were reduced to UFO spotters, not Federal Aviation Chief, describes evidence for UFO encounter with Japanese Airlines in 1986. That wasn't in the BBC report. So I knew at that point, and this is the key point of bringing this up, I knew there was a cover-up. Up until that point, I'd only suspected that there might be, but by that time, when I saw that BBC report of the event 2 years prior to when I discovered it, I knew there was a cover-up.
Yeah, but you weren't sure of what? You weren't sure of whether it's a cover-up of alien life visiting the Earth, or whether it's secret military craft or something else.
Right. And what was the key point, I've probably said this in interviews we've done in the past, but it's worth reiterating briefly here, is that Stephen Greer at the time made the connection between the free energy issue and the UFO issue, in essence saying, well, if we agree that these physical metallic craft are coming here to land, what is their power system? And he was arguing that they had a power system and that it had been back-engineered, and that the benefit to the rest of us would be to understand how these back-engineered power systems worked, so that we could use it as a source of energy to power our factories and everything. And that I hadn't heard of that before Greer, and so that was what really triggered me into renewed interest.
And that is a case that you make in the book, that it's not necessarily the cover-up of alien life that they're bothered about. It's the cover-up of energy technology and weapons-related technology, yes, and which in the black world may be linked.
Yes.
Yes. So energy, the vacuum, and what we term atoms or matter, right? We think that in the black world they've got a different understanding of those three things and how they interact with each other, and they've mastered it far more than white science, and that's what they're worried about. That's what they want to keep in the black. And the UFO subject is a pathway to that, which is why the UFO subject is disinformed upon and fun is made of it, etc. Whether aliens exist or not. Yeah, have I?
Yeah, that's exactly what my take on it. In that, yeah. So the UFO issue is used to keep the truth about energy and weapons technology developed in the black world and the black, call it black physics or ether physics. And there's various names you could give to that. That comes in strongly into the UFO field, so they need to manage the knowledge of those things, and that's why there is a muddle up and a cover up among UFO researchers, which we'll talk a bit more about and give a few examples as we go through this.
Yeah, well, can you give the example of a 2003 Daily Mail article which illustrates how the perception management of the UFO subject works?
Right, yeah, that's one that I just included from my archives because that happened around the time I was getting interested again. And this was to do with the Rendlesham Forest case, which we're probably going to do. I think Richard's going to do, you're going to do another program on that at some point, aren't you?
At some point, yes.
Yeah. So, but in this particular case, this reporter, I think, was called David Hanlon, Michael Hanlon. It's in the book anyway. So he'd written this article claiming that this Kevin Conn character had driven a police car around the base with a light on top, and that's what had created the entirety of the Rendlesham incident. And then he said that a helicopter had landed in the woods, and that's what people saw. So I made the argument in this particular chapter that this Michael Hanlon, he wasn't really interested in the truth of what happened at Rendlesham. It was just as easy for him to say, oh, they just mistook a helicopter landing for a UFO landing. He didn't actually bother to go and check that a helicopter had been reported landing, or whose helicopter it was, whether it belonged to what base it belonged to, or whether it was a civilian helicopter or whatever it was. He didn't bother to investigate that. He just assumed that it was a helicopter. That was the most likely explanation, and there was no point in talking about anything to do with a UFO of any other type landing.
Mm-hmm. And the key point is that it's that story that reaches a national daily newspaper, not interviews from the actual witnesses.
Right. So the statements of witnesses are not really covered in any sufficient detail, and when they put forward a story about it being the lighthouse or something like that, as in the example of Rendlesham, it's never explained as to why it couldn't have been the lighthouse. Mm-hmm.
So in your book you discuss different types of people, so agnostics, believers, skeptics and knowers. So can you explain them and why they are important to distinguish between in this subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like that with a lot of similar subjects that we cover, in that, you have people who have no interest at all. They don't want to look at things. They're just, more interested in football or whatever. And, seemingly you're always going to have those people. Then you have, for example, people who might have seen an odd light in the sky, which has piqued their curiosity. So they've seen a strange light travelling at high speed, or moving in an unusual way and stopping and starting and that sort of thing in a way that an aircraft or a helicopter doesn't do. So they might have an interest and they won't dismiss the phenomenon out of hand, but they've never really explored it to the depth that you and I have. And then you have somebody who's had an experience, and you might categorise somebody like Travis Walton. So he had an experience and he knows certain things. And then obviously you have skeptics and debunkers who want to say that anything that people like Travis Walton says, or John Callahan says, or anyone, it must be false. They must be either bad observers or they must have some mental problem, because what they describe can't be fitted in with a standard reductionist worldview of the only things that fly are rockets, and the only way of travelling is by cars and trains and boats and so forth. And there's no such thing as anti-gravity propulsion because it's been looked at before and it's never been made viable, so therefore it doesn't exist and it's not possible to do it. Mm-hmm. That would be my characterisation of a skeptic reductionist.
Mm-hmm. And you have a problem with believers.
Yes, yeah. So there are the other people who believe that something has happened to them, but they've never sort of gone further and tried to explore what actually happened and get to the bottom of it. So you can have a belief, you do have this religious element to the UFO research community, that people will believe that they've had a certain experience, but they won't get down to what actually happened. They'll stay at the belief level rather than finding evidence to support what may or may not have happened to them. And then you get speakers going around the circuits talking about their contacts with aliens, and they won't really go much beyond that, and wonder where is this contact really coming from? What's the source? What's the motivation behind this intelligence contacting me? Is there a motivation? They tend to stop short of those sorts of questions, and I do explore some of those questions and those attitudes in the book as well.
Now, you give some quotes from US presidents, and there's a surprisingly large number of presidents have either been involved with or made comments about the UFO subject. So can you give us a little bit on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, certainly Truman, he was quoted in a Nick Cook 2005 documentary, Harry Truman, that he had meetings mentioning flying saucers all the time. He actually said, we've got a film clip of him saying that. And so not a lot of people are aware of that. So the UFO subject has been of interest to US presidents. And of course, Jimmy Carter had a sighting I think in the 1960s with several other people, and he filed a UFO report. And then, of course, perhaps more well known are the comments of Ronald Reagan. And then you have comments from Clinton. And Clinton he actually had this meeting at a ranch with Lawrence Rockefeller, and Grant Cameron got these pictures of Hillary Clinton shaking hands with Lawrence Rockefeller, and she was holding a book which was identified as Paul Davis's book about extraterrestrial life. So they definitely had conversations about the subject back in the 1990s. But some people, for example, think that the Clintons, are going to or were going to give out information,
or wanted to,
and maybe they did. But we have to remember that the Clintons are essentially criminals, and anyone that wants to look into the issue of tainted blood, for example, can find out what sort of people the Clintons are. So what I'm saying is that just because a political leader, whether they're American or British or whatever nationality, says that they're interested in disclosing the truth about UFOs, doesn't mean that they're a truthful person generally, and that they're a good person. Right. They can have still done horrible things, which it seems to be the case with the Clintons from my research, and they claiming they want to tell the truth about UFOs. The other one that's really interesting is when Obama was on the Jimmy Kimmel show in, I think it was 2015, I forget the exact date. And Jimmy Kimmel had Bill Clinton on, he'd had Hillary Clinton on, and he'd asked them the question about the UFO secrecy. He'd asked them all the same question.
The moment I was inaugurated, my hand it'd still be hot from touching the Bible, and I would immediately race to wherever they have the files about Area 51 and UFOs, and I'd go through everything to find out what happened. Right. Did you do that?
That's why you will not be president. Because that's the first thing that you would do.
It's at
the aliens won't let it happen. You reveal all their secrets. They exercise strict control over us.
If you read the clip, it's made as a joke and everyone's laughing. The whole studio is in stitches, But if you actually look at the literal words that he says, what is the meaning of? Why would he say that?
All right. Although many presidents have been known to comment and made serious comments, none of them have actually made a proper public disclosure. That's never happened.
No.
Now, and we think that's due to black technology.
Yes.
Now, in 2008, the UK government started to release so-called UFO files, which I've covered in the past, which were drip-fed out over a number of years. But they, there was nothing top secret in them. It was predominantly just reports that people had filled in and sent to the Ministry of Defence. There wasn't anything revealing in those files that people didn't already know.
No, that's right. As you say, there were maybe, there were a few reports that probably came out that people hadn't seen, like RAF pilots had seen an object while they were on missions. There might have been one or two things like that. but there was no type of disclosure that there has been an official group, like, for example, you know, that you've covered with the contact that you saw, saying this group 8, group 5-8.
Yeah, the group, group 5-8, which I suspect it was a special forces group made up of 5-8 Field Squadron Regiment. Right?
Yeah. So I mean, we had no acknowledgement that anything like that of any kind was ever sanctioned by the British government or the US government. None of that type of disclosure has come out in any official documents.
Yeah, there was no admission of any of their own activities.
No, that's what I mean.
And other countries were doing the same. So we could ask the question, was that some sort of worldwide initiative, this UFO files being released?
Yeah, that's what I sort of put together in the book. There seemed to be, you know, this was being done in parallel in several different countries between, I think, about 2006 and 2008. I mean, maybe it was to do with just the timing of the development of the internet, such that things, you know, many more people by 2008 had got quite good, you know, high-speed internet access. So it was possible for them to diffuse some of the interest in the UFO subject and stop all these letters pouring into government departments by just releasing the documents and putting them on various websites and saying, that's everything we have, we're going to deny everything else, just go and look at those documents and go away. You know, that's maybe all it was.
I think the UK effort was an administrative move in order to make it easier for them by putting the files in an archive for people to see, rather than have to answer hundreds of FOI requests, because it's a popular subject that people ask questions about.
Yes.
Now, there have been formal investigations. Some information has been published by governments, and so in the USA, in the 40s and 50s, we've had Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, that was the 1960s, and later the Condon Report. So people can research those if you want to.
That's right, and there was an earlier one which I came across called Project Saucer, which actually was the first one, which is an interesting title. I think that was in 1948, so that was just before, I think, Project Sign. I think Project Saucer turned into Project Sign, and I wasn't aware of that until I'd, you know, been sort of putting together this book. So yeah.
Yeah, and there were congressional hearings which took place in the USA in 1966 and 68. So the French government did their own investigation into UFOs and produced a report in 1999 entitled The Committee Report, UFOs and Defence, What Must We Be Prepared For? And it has a fascinating conclusion, which I'll just read out.
Yes.
It states that the UFO problem, so this is a government which is stating this, the UFO problem cannot be eliminated by mere caustic and offhand witticisms. Studies have been done that demonstrate the most certain physical reality of completely unknown flying objects with remarkable flight performances and noiselessness, apparently operating by intelligent beings. Secret craft, definitely of earthly origin, drones, stealth aircraft, etc., can only explain a minority of cases. If we go back far enough in time, we clearly perceive the limits of this explanation. A single hypothesis sufficiently takes into account the facts and, for the most part, only calls for present-day science. It is the hypothesis of extraterrestrial visitors. A model of magnetohydrodynamic technology, which could be employed to propel the UFOs in the atmosphere, has been well developed. The extraterrestrial hypothesis is far from the best scientific hypothesis. It certainly has not been categorically proven, but strong presumptions exist in its favour, and if it is correct, it is loaded with consequences. So they're leaving it open there. They're saying that there's definitely things in the sky which have unexplicable dynamics. But is it suggesting that they might be man-made that the French government doesn't know about?
I think that's what's implied. If you know, you can read that conclusion, and yes, I think that's what's implied in that they're saying yes. It seems to be a combination of stealth type programs and some type of extraterrestrial technology. Now, that report was written by a sort of panel of experts from the aerospace industry, and it was given to the the French government. I'm not sure if it's accurate to say that the people involved worked for the government, but they were paid, to produce that report by the government. And I think there were one or two government people involved in it, but it was never officially translated into English. That translation was done unofficially and published on the internet, I think in the early 2000s. And it was a chap, I think, called Bernard Thuniel, who runs a magazine in France. He was given a copy of the report to publish in his magazine. I don't think it was generally discussed in the French press, nor was it discussed outside of France very much. And in fact, as Leslie Kane will tell you, who was a reporter, a US reporter, she tried to get a report about that published, and she wrote to all the mainstream US papers, and they didn't want to know. The Boston Globe eventually published a report about it in, I think, early 2000 or something. So again, it was a serious report, but it wasn't seriously reported in any of the world's media, to my knowledge.
It suggests there's some sort of D-notice or ridicule notice on the subject, that there's a rule that they have to make fun of it.
Yes. I mean, of course, we just mentioned very briefly here that now seems to be changing to some extent, as we've, with all this latest thing with the To the Stars Academy and the Louis Elizondo stuff. So we obviously were aware of that, and you've done programs and talks about that in the past. So maybe we'll get onto that later, but I just wanted to insert that here.
Now, you think that the issue of UFOs is linked to 9/11. So I'm just going to quote from your book, Andrew.
Okay.
You say that one aspect of this, which I have already written up extensively in 3 of my other books, is the truth about what happened on 9/11. Leslie Kean, like Stephen Greer, Steve Bassett, Nick Pope and many others, have not yet publicly stated that the cover-up about the UFO ET issue is unquestionably related in some way to the cover-up of what happened on 9/11. This is perhaps the acknowledgement that is needed if we wish to learn more about the truth regarding UFOs, aliens and the like. So can you explain that, Andrew?
Yes, I mean, that's essentially, I say that probably a few times in the book, really to make the point that a lot of people are quite comfortable talking about, and you and I have done programs on this whole thing, about the various technologies for propulsion being developed and all these various methods. And even in that Cometa report you mentioned about magnetohydrodynamics, which I think was Townsend Brown was working on that in the 50s. So a lot of the UFO researchers are happy to talk about that side of things, and maybe they've got some type of a propulsion system developed and an energy system developed. But what about weapons? What about weapons technology? And I say in the book, and I've said it elsewhere, I've said it in the 9/11 books as well, one of the clear links to me seems to be this Science Applications International Corporation, big US defense contractor, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, I think, in the US. They were consultants to NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, to produce their reports about the destruction of the World Trade Center. And the time that I'd heard of SAIC before I heard about their connection to NIST was out of the mouth of Stephen Greer, because he said that one of his disclosure witnesses, I think was Denise McKenzie was her name, I mentioned it in the book, she had said that Science Applications International Corporation were big benefactors of the black budget, and this was in relation to the study of UFO technology.
Let me just interject, Andrew, there, because there's 2 things I think we need to make clear in this. Firstly, the World Trade Center complex was destroyed with a directed energy weapon, right? That's been proven for many years now in Dr. Judy Wood's book, right? The World Trade Center complex was destroyed with a directed energy weapon. SAIC are known to carry out research into directed energy weapons, and they helped write the report
Correct.
of the 9/11 Commission report on what happened there.
Right.
But they've also made comments about or are involved with other types of technology linked to the UFO field.
Right.
So carry on, Andrew.
Absolutely. No, that's great, and that's exactly what the point that I'm making, and you've added to that substantially. And so SAIC, one of their other specialities is running psychological operations. Again, there's a YouTube documentary about their role of running psychological operations in Iraq following the American invasion. And so this is something that UFO researchers won't talk about. None of them I think that you and I are probably the only two people who bring up this SAIC UFO 9/11 connection, if you want to call it that, however you want to label it. It is undeniable. It's in the documentation, and I think when you see some of the aspects of the technology which was used to destroy the World Trade Center, as documented by Dr. Judy Wood, you can see how it relates to energy, which then relates to how, for example, the flying saucer propulsion mechanisms appear to operate using some technique of field propulsion and some type of anti-gravity. And those aspects have come up in the evidence from the destruction of the World Trade Center.
So can you just highlight again SAIC's connection to the UFO subject?
Well, that was mentioned by Stephen Greer. He mentions it in a testimony by, I think, does say Denise McKenzie. Greer also talks about SAIC in relation to what Bobby Ray Inman said, because Bobby Ray Inman, who I think was former deputy director of the CIA, he was also involved with Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, in other words. So Greer mentions that connection there as well. I mentioned that in the book.
Mm-hmm. If you want to learn a bit more about SAIC and its possible involvement in 9/11, you can watch Chris Hampton's film.
It's called 9/11 Alchemy. Yes, that's a very good document of
9/11 Alchemy.